Hi everyone. The title of my poster is The Validity of Expanded Survey Proposal for the Pacific Halibut Fishery. For those who don't know, the Pacific halibut is a large groundfish pictured in figure 1, very similar to an Atlantic halibut for those who know what that looks like. The fishery and the TAC in the Pacific is set and managed through a secretariat called the International Pacific Halibut Commission, the IPHC. And that's a group that does the stock assessment work and the administrative work to manage the treaty and manage the relationship around this fishery between the US and Canada. Every year they perform an annual set line survey throughout their regulatory areas, which extend from northern Alaska all the way down to central California. BC is the only Canadian region in the regulatory area scheme, and that's Area 2B. So this past year, IPHC staff proposed to expand the survey to include 108 new stations coast-wide. You can see in figure 3 that is a snapshot of the BC coast. All the black dots are existing survey locations in the grid style fishery independent survey, and all the red dots are proposed new ones. And it's notable that on the bottom right hand side, on the inside of Vancouver Island, the Strait of Georgia, there's a lot of new stations there, a lot of red dots. There's actually minimal to zero halibut fishing commercially inside there. So this led to the objective of this poster and this research that investigates whether survey expansion is warranted and if it will actually result in improved stock assessment for Pacific halibut. The reason I chose this was I've begun to work a lot more with this fishery in my current job, and I recently attended the annual meeting in 2018 where the survey expansion was proposed. So in terms of my research, I searched in online and in the marine science journals for keywords like Pacific halibut, stock assessment, expansion, survey methods, IPHC setline survey, and halibut survey data sources. I looked at the ICES Journal of Marine Science and ResearchGate, and also found a lot of data on the IPHC website itself, where all of their research, which is published by fairly seasoned and experienced PhDs in stock assessment biology, post a lot of their work, and there's a lot of really excellent information on this on their website. Albeit I realize that research from the IPHC would obviously be biased towards the position that the survey was warranted because they're the ones proposing the expansion in the first place. So in terms of results of looking across this data, I found that right off the bat there's just data source from many areas that go towards the stock assessment in this fishery. The fishery even has the total removals from 1961 to 2015 with more higher resolution of that data in the past few decades, but they actually account for all removals from sport fishing, discards, bycatch, commercial and recreational from Alaska down to Central California. And BC is particularly good because even the non-charter recreational fishing catch is accounted for, whereas in Alaska they only account and manage for sport fishing under commercial charters and lodges, but in BC it's managed to every possible removal of a halibut in any fishery that is out there, whether it be sport or commercial. And so that data from the setline survey combined with the catch monitoring data and the fishery dependent data leads to a pretty robust source of information to provide for the stock assessment. But in the end, most of the data and most of the stock assessment is still based on the setline survey data from IPHC staff. There is a National Marine Fisheries Service Alaskan trawl survey done every year that provides halibut data, and that was matched in 2008 to the IPHC setline survey at a 1-to-1 ratio. So it basically aligned approximately identically with the model for stock assessment through the setline survey. So that is a positive validation of the methods that the setline survey data provides the IPHC staff to do their stock assessment modeling. As well, the survey data and the data behind the halibut fishery is so robust but also so varied, as it comes from so many different sources, and the monitoring of the commercial fisheries is so high. I think I missed saying earlier that a lot of the fisheries actually have full 100% observer coverage in the form of either at-sea observers or electronic monitoring. So, when it comes to the halibut longline fishery, like every fish is accounted for and every fish discarded is accounted for. It was the first fishery in BC to get MSC certification. So because the data behind this fishery is so strong, it's actually used, I found that it was used in other people's research as a model for standardization of abundance data across a fishery that has different sources of data. There's a paper by Ono et al. About basically developing standardization techniques for generic fisheries that have different data sources, abundance data from across different sources, and they used halibut as the one to build that model across. So that was another kind of positive win, I thought, for the setline survey, that it was good enough that it was being used in research to just determine generic research solutions across fisheries stock assessment. And again, in 2014, there was a previous expansion of the survey, and that actually led to some fairly substantial changes across the weight per unit effort in areas that had not previously been surveyed. So when they expanded to these new areas in 2014, there was increases of between 4 and 12% in weight per unit effort in those areas that were then accounted for in the overall model. So that led to changes in how the apportionment of the stock biomass was spread across the regulatory regions that I spoke about before, from northern Alaska to central California. When the changes in weight per unit effort affect what the model says the stock is in biomass out there, then that changes how the apportionment of that biomass is divided up between the regulatory areas. So there were actual positive results from that previous survey that led to changes for the fishery. So my conclusions were that, for one, the Pacific halibut fishery is data rich, largely because of the setline survey. That's the main source of data, and it's been happening every year for so many years that they have a great database of historical fisheries data on that. The previous survey expansion did lead to changes in weight per unit effort, which did lead to changes in the stock assessment, and in the case of BC, led to positive changes in the weight per unit effort calculations, which led to a larger share of the halibut biomass out of the overall biomass coast-wide that is divided between US and Canada. So the final conclusion related to my objective was that the survey expansion is warranted and will likely improve stock assessment. I was referring earlier to stock assessment in areas where there isn't currently a halibut fishery, like the inside waters of Vancouver Island. Well, that can actually result in a net benefit for places like BC, as it'll boost the weight per unit effort. If there is no fish in those areas, well, then the areas that do have fish will become a larger proportion, which will then lead to different changes to the biomass that could be in BC's favor. So I'm not here live to answer any questions, but I'm going to try to post this link and get this converted to YouTube so that people can watch it if it doesn't work on the presentation night on Wednesday. But please feel free to write me any questions. I'll start a discussion blog, and thanks very much for listening.